The late afternoon sun filtered through the wide bay windows of the Whitmore estate, casting a warm golden hue over the sitting room. The place was elegant, spacious, and tastefully decorated with rare art pieces and polished mahogany furniture. But for all its beauty, it lacked the one thing Cassandra Whitmore longed for: peace of heart. She sat curled on the velvet couch in a soft cream sweater, legs tucked under her, absent-mindedly stirring a cup of mint tea. Across from her, her best friend Zoe sat cross-legged on an armchair, sipping a glass of iced lemonade, eyes trained on Cassandra with a look that blended amusement and concern. "You're 28, Cass," Zoe said, a teasing lilt in her voice. "You've got more suitors than a queen in a fairy tale. Your parents are practically begging you to pick one, and you're still holding out for some mystery man from 5 years ago." Cassandra smiled faintly, but didn't look up. Her fingers traced the rim of her teacup. "It wasn't just some man, Zoe. He saved my life." Zoe rolled her eyes, but softly. "I know. I've heard the story a dozen times. And I'll tell it a dozen more if I have to," Cassandra said with a rare laugh, then grew quiet. Her smile faded into thoughtfulness. "You weren't there that night. I was terrified. I thought I was going to die. And then, out of nowhere, he came. It was dark. You didn't even see his face," Zoe reminded her, though her tone wasn't mocking. "He could have been anyone." "I remember his voice," Cassandra whispered. "He didn't say much, but I remember how steady he sounded. I remember how strong he was, how quickly he fought those men off. And then he just disappeared. Didn't wait to be thanked. Didn't even tell me his name." Zoe sighed. "And you think he's still out there, just waiting for you to recognize his voice and fall madly in love?" "I don't know," Cassandra admitted, finally meeting her friend's eyes. "But I can't pretend to feel something for Julian just because my parents think he's good for our legacy." Zoe leaned forward. "Julian might not be your mystery hero, but he's safe, loyal, and ridiculously rich. Isn't that enough for someone who was raised to inherit an empire?" Cassandra flinched. "That's exactly the problem. They want me to marry for business, not love. I know they mean well, but I'm not a company." "Maybe not," Zoe said gently. "But you are its future. You hold the lion's share of Whitmore Steel. The board trusts you. The staff adores you. You've made more progressive decisions than any of your father's old partners ever dared to. Don't throw all that away chasing a ghost." Cassandra fell silent, staring out at the gardens. "I'm not chasing a ghost," she said after a while. "I just want something real. Someone who loves me for me, not for what I represent or what I can give." Zoe didn't answer right away. She understood Cassandra in a way very few people did. They'd been friends since college, and she had seen firsthand how the weight of inheritance and expectation shaped every part of Cassandra's life, from how she spoke in public to who she was allowed to date. She set her glass down on the side table and walked over to the couch, sitting beside her. "Then promise me something," she said, placing a hand over Cassandra's. "If someone comes along claiming to be that man, you'll be careful. Love can blind even the sharpest minds, Cass. Especially when your heart's been waiting this long." Cassandra nodded slowly. "I promise." But promises were easier to make than to keep, especially when danger didn't arrive wearing a mask, but instead walked in through the front door, smiling. That evening, Cassandra attended a private gala hosted by one of her father's former business partners. Her parents had hoped she'd cross paths with Julian again. He would be there. But Cassandra had no intention of giving the man another chance to talk about mergers over champagne. The ballroom was filled with people in elegant gowns and tuxedos. Soft jazz played from a live band near the fountain courtyard. Cassandra moved through the crowd with practiced grace, smiling politely, nodding when necessary, but her heart wasn't in it. And then she saw him. He was tall, dark-haired, and dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that fit too perfectly to be an accident. He wasn't loud or showy like the others. In fact, he stood alone near the balcony, watching the crowd with a calm, almost detached air. Their eyes met. Something about him, his posture, the stillness in his gaze, tugged at her memory. Her heart skipped. He looked away first, respectful, almost shy. Then he slowly walked toward the refreshments table. Cassandra's feet moved before her thoughts could catch up. She found herself beside him, reaching for a flute of champagne just as he did. Their hands brushed. He looked at her again. Closer now. "I'm sorry," he said in a deep, composed voice. "Please go ahead." That voice. Her breath caught. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the glass. No, please, she said softly, her eyes never leaving his. You first. He smiled just a touch. Thank you, Miss Cassandra, she replied. David, he offered, extending his hand. When their hands touched again, she felt a strange, quiet rush. She told herself it couldn't be. The world didn't work like that. People didn't just find the past again by accident. But her heart had been waiting too long. And sometimes love sees only what it wants to see. The evening after the gala lingered in Cassandra's memory, like a warm aftertaste. She didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety, but from a quiet thrill that bloomed beneath her ribs. David. His name was simple, his smile sincere, and his voice, too familiar to ignore. The coincidence felt surreal. She tried not to leap to conclusions. Perhaps she was imagining it all, projecting years of yearning onto a stranger. Still, something about him gnawed gently at the edges of her thoughts. By noon the next day, a large bouquet of white tulips arrived at her estate with a handwritten note tucked neatly between the stems. You looked peaceful in a room full of noise. I hope this isn't too forward, but I'd be honored to take you to dinner. David. Zoe raised an eyebrow when Cassandra showed her the flowers. Oh, we're doing secret admirers now, she teased. He's not a secret, Cassandra murmured, tracing the petals. He's different. You met him once. Yes, Cassandra said. But it feels like I've known him longer. Zoe hesitated. You don't think he might be? I'm not saying he is, Cassandra cut in, her cheeks flushing. But what if he is? What if it's him, Zoe? Zoe sighed, softening. Then take it slow. Just slow. Let your head keep up with your heart. Later David took her to a quiet rooftop restaurant overlooking the city skyline. The kind of place that didn't scream for attention, but whispered elegance with every plate and every low-lit corner. He wore a navy jacket, no tie, with just the right amount of ease and polish. I hope I'm not being too forward, he said once they were seated, his eyes never straying from hers. Cassandra smiled. You're fine. I like forward. They talked for hours. He asked about her life. Not the heiress life that everyone saw, but the real one. Her favorite authors. The childhood years. The pressure of carrying an empire. How lonely it got at the top. And in turn, he spoke of simple things. He claimed to be a small investor in startups. Someone who had worked his way from nothing after losing his parents early. He didn't boast or flaunt. He merely let the shadows of struggle speak between his words. Cassandra listened, drawn not just to his voice, but to the unspoken depth behind it. It was only on the ride home that her stomach fluttered with that uncomfortable, confusing fear. Because what if she wasn't just falling for him? What if she was falling for the idea of him? The weeks that followed were slow and soft like the early notes of a love song. David became a quiet rhythm in Cassandra's life. Never overwhelming, always respectful. He brought her coffee on days he knew she had board meetings. He remembered her favorite authors and surprised her with out-of-print editions. He never talked about money. Never once tried to impress. Zoe watched from the sidelines, her support laced with subtle worry. I'm happy you're happy, she told Cassandra over brunch one morning. But he's practically a ghost before you met him. Where's he from? Who does he know? What's his circle like? He doesn't have one, Cassandra said defensively. He's private. Not everyone wants to be on social media or in magazines. I get that, Zoe replied. But you're not just anyone. Your life doesn't happen in the shadows, Cass. If he's going to be part of it, he can't hide. I'm not rushing, Cassandra insisted. I'm just seeing where it goes. Zoe let it be. But the seed of doubt she planted didn't fully disappear. Meanwhile, David's charm became a steady fire in Cassandra's heart. Her parents, particularly her mother, were less thrilled. Julian still called occasionally, sending gifts and emails that Cassandra ignored with increasing irritation. Her father had grown quieter, more withdrawn about her personal life, preferring not to meddle as long as she remained focused on the company. David, sensing the distance between Cassandra and her family, used it to grow even closer. By the third month, David had met more of her friends, dined with her father, who remained cold but civil, and begun subtly accompanying her to some charity events. He never asked about the company. He never asked about her finances. And that, ironically, made her trust him even more. He seemed to want her, not what she owned. Have you ever thought about settling down? She asked one quiet evening while they walked the garden paths behind the estate. I used to, David said, gazing at the stars. But I never found someone who saw me, until now. Cassandra's heart skipped. In that moment, she began to believe in something she had never dared to before. That maybe, just maybe, fate hadn't forgotten her. What she didn't know, what the world didn't see, was that several cities away, in a modest apartment filled with unspoken truths and impatient longing, a woman stared at a picture of Cassandra clipped from a business magazine. Her fingers tapped the photo absently while a little girl played with a toy truck nearby. The woman looked nothing like Cassandra, rougher, harder, but her eyes were cold and sharp. "You better not be falling for her for real," she muttered under her breath, staring at the photo as if it could hear her. This was supposed to be simple. Then she turned to the girl and smiled. "Come here, baby. Mama's got big plans for you." The winter air had begun to soften, and with it Cassandra's guard. As February bled into March, her days slowly stitched themselves around the presence of David. He had a way of sliding into her world so naturally, never demanding, never too much, just always there. Morning walks became their thing. He would bring her a cup of lavender tea, wrap her scarf around her neck, and walk the garden path beside her like a man content to do nothing but listen to the rustle of trees and the rhythm of her voice. Cassandra didn't fall in love with him all at once. It came in fragments. Watching him kneel to tie her shoe on a cold morning, hearing him defend her decisions in front of her more skeptical board members, the way he held her hand when she didn't know she needed it. He wasn't perfect, but he made her feel seen. That mattered more than diamonds and dinners. Even Zoe, though still skeptical, had grown quieter in her concerns, but not silent. "I'm just saying," Zoe murmured over coffee one afternoon. "This man came out of nowhere. You know his story, sure. But what do you know about his past?" Cassandra exhaled slowly. "We've talked about this." "No, Cass. You've talked. He's listened. And there's a difference." Cassandra didn't respond right away. Her silence wasn't agreement. It was weariness. She wanted to believe love didn't always come with disclaimers. "I get it," she said eventually. "You're worried. But I'm not blind, Zoe. I'm just choosing to trust." Zoe's eyes softened. "Then let me trust with you. Just be sure," she said. That evening, Cassandra and David hosted a small gathering at her estate. Just a few friends and acquaintances, low music, warm lights. Cassandra moved with grace among the guests, and David, as always, stood a respectful step behind her. Present, but never overpowering. But something changed when Zoe arrived. She walked in wearing a soft gold dress, her hair swept up, eyes sharp and calculating. David greeted her like he did everyone else, with warmth, charm, and that disarming smile. But Zoe didn't smile back. She nodded politely, observed him closely, and then walked past. Later, Cassandra caught her friend alone on the balcony, staring into the garden with a furrowed brow. "You okay?" Zoe turned, her voice low. "Something's off about him." Cassandra stiffened. "This again?" "No, listen," Zoe said gently. "I talked to a friend in New York. Works in small business circles. I asked about David. No one's ever heard of him. Not under his name, not under any of the firms he says he worked with. It's like he came from nowhere." Cassandra blinked. "That's not proof of anything." "No, it's not," Zoe agreed. "But it's strange." Cassandra looked away, eyes tightening. "You think I'm being conned?" "I think you're smart," Zoe said carefully. "And I think even smart women get lonely. I'm not saying he's a liar. I'm saying, if he is, it'll be too late by the time you know." The conversation rattled Cassandra more than she admitted. Later that night, when she and David were alone in the conservatory, she brought it up, gently. "Zoe's worried about you," she said with a half-smile. David glanced up from the book he was pretending to read. "She always is." She looked into your work history. His smile faltered just a hair, so small that most people would miss it. But Cassandra saw it. She knew faces, red eyes. He closed the book softly. And she couldn't find anything. No records. No contacts. David looked at her for a long moment, then leaned back. "I knew this would come up eventually." His voice didn't rise. He didn't fidget. He simply looked disappointed. "I've had to protect myself, Cassandra," he said quietly. "I wasn't always in good circles. Some of the early investments I made. Let's just say I learned the hard way about trust. I keep my name off most things now. I don't want people tracing me, using me." She searched his face. "But you're with me. I live under a spotlight." He leaned forward, took her hand. "You're worth the risk." It sounded like love. It sounded like trust. But for the first time, Cassandra felt something she couldn't name creep under her skin. The autumn wind had begun to shift in the Whitmore Estate gardens. Where once the trees shimmered with summer's pride, now golden and auburn leaves drifted gently to the earth like whispers of change. Cassandra stood at her bedroom window early that morning, arms folded around herself, her gaze lost in the soft movement of the world outside. Below, preparations were quietly underway for her wedding. A quiet wedding, just as she wanted. Not the spectacle her parents had envisioned with a cathedral, 10 bridesmaids, and society's who's who seated in gold chairs. Cassandra had insisted on something small. Family, close friends, the board members, and a few loyal staff who had been with her family for decades. It wasn't that she didn't want to celebrate love, but rather, she didn't want to parade it. Especially when, even now, a part of her still held on to shadows of doubt. Yet David had been nothing but patient, loving, gentle. It had been nearly a year since they met at the gala, and in that time, David had proven himself attentive and understanding. He'd never pushed, never demanded. He was there when she needed him, silent when she needed space. When she told him she wanted to delay the wedding to focus on company transitions, he hadn't blinked. He simply told her, "Whenever you're ready, Cassandra. I'm not going anywhere." And it was that unwavering stillness that had finally broken through her hesitation. Still, this morning, as she stood staring at the golden leaves, Cassandra's chest felt heavy. Not with regret, but with caution. A soft knock came. She turned to find Zoe entering, holding a small velvet box. "Don't freak out," Zoe said, smiling gently. "But I got you something old, something new, something borrowed, and something just a little ridiculous." Cassandra chuckled. "You didn't have to." "I know, but I did." Zoe opened the box to reveal a delicate pair of earrings. Vintage pearls set in rose gold. "These were my grandmother's. She wore them at her wedding, and my mom wore them at hers. I'm lending them to you." Cassandra blinked, deeply touched. "Zoe, there's also a bracelet I found last week, brand new, and your mom's handkerchief is already tucked into your bouquet. The ridiculous part is this," she added, fishing out a small crystal frog from her purse. "For luck." Laughing now, Cassandra hugged her. "Thank you. For everything." Zoe held her for a moment longer than necessary. "Are you sure about this, Cass? I mean, really sure?" Cassandra pulled back slightly. "No, but I'm willing to give it a real chance." Zoe didn't argue. Instead, she squeezed her hand and whispered, "Then I'll stand by you, no matter what." The wedding ceremony was held beneath the arbor in the rose garden. The sky was a soft powder blue, with white clouds drifting lazily across. White roses and pale pink lilies surrounded the aisle. A string quartet played in the background as Cassandra, in an ivory silk gown with lace sleeves and a small train, walked slowly down the garden path, her father by her side. David waited at the altar in a dark navy tuxedo, his face unreadable but calm, the picture of composed devotion. Zoe stood just behind Cassandra, ever watchful. The ceremony was quick. Vows were exchanged. A single tear slipped down Cassandra's cheek when David promised to cherish her, always. He kissed her hand reverently after the rings were placed. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, applause broke gently in the garden. Champagne was passed, toasts were raised, and laughter filled the air. Cassandra smiled through it all, though a strange pressure lingered beneath her joy, like a clock had just started ticking. Later that evening, when the guests had departed and the household quieted, Cassandra stood alone by the fireplace in her sitting room. Her gown now replaced by a soft silk robe, she stared into the flickering flames. David walked in behind her, his footsteps soft. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "I am," she whispered. "Just thinking." "About?" She hesitated. "About how strange it is to be someone's wife. I spent so many years chasing the idea of love, and now that I've found it, I almost don't know what to do with it." David took both her hands and drew her closer. "Then let me show you, day by day. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." She leaned into his embrace. If only she had known that he was the weight. 2 years later, the Whitmore estate was filled with laughter again, but it was smaller now, more domestic. Cassandra had given birth to a baby girl, whom she named Evelyn. Bright-eyed and observant, Evelyn became the light of Cassandra's life. She took after her mother in spirit, always curious and gentle. David seemed to adore her too. He played the part of the devoted father perfectly, carrying Evelyn through the halls, reading to her at night, attending every doctor's appointment. At least when he was around. But as the years passed, Cassandra began to notice the small things. Late-night phone calls David wouldn't explain. Trips he claimed were business, but never left a paper trail. Expenses that didn't add up. And once, a woman's gold bracelet was found under the passenger seat of his car. He swore it belonged to his sister. Cassandra had never met the woman. By the time Evelyn was 5, Cassandra had stopped asking questions. Not because she didn't want answers, because she feared she already knew them. She focused on her daughter, on the company, on surviving the gnawing sense that her marriage had become a beautiful illusion. The beginning of the end. The final year of her life was a quiet one, on the surface. Evelyn turned 6 in spring. Cassandra took her on a small trip to the coast, just the two of them. She sat on the sand, watching Evelyn chase waves, and told her stories of her own childhood. "If anything ever happens to me," she whispered to her daughter one night, brushing hair from her face, "just remember, you are more than enough. You're strong. You're everything." Back home, David had grown colder, less patient. And what Cassandra didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Veronica, his longtime mistress and college sweetheart, had moved to a rental home nearby. With her daughter, a girl just a year older than Evelyn. David visited them often, pretending it was business. And soon, the plan he and Veronica had carefully mapped out over the years would come to life. Cassandra's will, written shortly after Evelyn's birth, left everything, her estate, her shares, her assets, to her daughter. A protective move, a wise move, but David hadn't expected it. And when he found out, everything changed. One cold winter night, Cassandra was found lifeless in her bathroom. The scene was pristine. A half-empty bottle of sleeping pills. A final letter, typed, not handwritten. No signs of a struggle. The world believed it. Suicide, they said. Pressure. Loneliness. Depression. David mourned in front of the cameras, stoic but broken. And 2 weeks later, Veronica moved into the Whitmore estate. With her daughter. They said it was for Evelyn, so she could be raised with a sister. But behind closed doors, Evelyn was silenced. She was watched. Her questions were dismissed. Her instincts were discouraged. But inside her, the truth had begun to whisper. And one day, she would learn what really happened to her mother, and make them all pay. The grand Whitmore estate, once a haven of elegance and warmth, had become a cold, unfamiliar house. Gone were the fragrant garden parties Cassandra used to host, the laughter echoing from the parlor, the comforting rhythm of her presence. In her place came silence and cruelty. David had wasted no time after Cassandra's death. Weeks after the funeral, quiet, closed casket, manipulated to seem like a tragic end by suicide, he married Veronica Hayes in a discreet ceremony attended by only a few selected guests. Gossip was kept at bay with carefully planted narratives, and no one questioned the whirlwind changes that followed. Veronica and her daughter, Camilla, moved into the estate not as guests, but as new rulers. Camilla was a year older than Evelyn, 7 when Cassandra died. But it wasn't just age that gave Camilla an advantage. From day one, she was treated as the favored child. And Evelyn became a shadow in her own home. At first, Evelyn didn't understand. She would ask for her mother, only to be met with cold stares or a quick, rehearsed answer. "Your mother was troubled, sweetie. She's resting now." Camilla got the bigger room, the one that used to be Evelyn's nursery. Evelyn was moved to a smaller guest room down the hall. Her mother's belongings disappeared. Her favorite piano lessons were canceled. Her toys were given to Camilla or thrown out. Even the household staff who had adored Cassandra were replaced with people loyal to Veronica. And when Evelyn complained, when she cried at night, when she asked questions, she was met with punishments. Years passed and the cruelty evolved. Veronica was clever. She didn't hit Evelyn, at least not often enough to bruise, but she did something worse. She erased her. Evelyn's clothes were always secondhand now, often ill-fitting or out of season. She was made to eat separately, if she was allowed a full meal at all. While Camilla wore designer labels and attended elite dance classes, Evelyn was made to scrub kitchen floors if she dared ask for anything. At school, it was no better. Camilla played the role of the perfect daughter. Pretty, popular, adored by teachers. She told stories about how her poor stepsister was unstable, just like her late mother, which spread through whispers until even classmates began to avoid Evelyn. David, he turned a blind eye. He had grown colder with each year, more obsessed with control, more eager to secure his image as a respectable businessman. Whenever Evelyn sought his attention, he dismissed her with a glance or a grunt. His affection was reserved for Camilla, his new daughter. The truth was, David feared Evelyn more than he would admit. She reminded him too much of Cassandra, not just in appearance, but in spirit. And that terrified him, because Evelyn was the rightful heir. By age 12, Evelyn had learned to keep her head down. She read books in secret. She journaled in worn notebooks. She dreamed of her mother's laughter. She grew quiet, but never weak. Zoe came around often. She was the only consistent light in Evelyn's life. She brought gifts, small notes written in Cassandra's handwriting, preserved letters, and on rare occasions, she took Evelyn away for the weekend. But her hands were tied. Evelyn still under her father's guardianship. Zoe once said bitterly to a lawyer, "He won't let her go," and without solid proof of abuse. So Evelyn stayed. She endured. The day she turned 18, everything changed. She stood on the balcony of the estate, staring into the horizon. The wind tugged at her curls, her frame taller now, refined, elegant in a quiet way that echoed her mother's presence. She wore a modest dress. Zoe had given it to her the night before, and her expression was calm. But inside, a storm brewed. Downstairs, Veronica was celebrating with Camilla, who had just received an offer to attend a private university on the East Coast. Funded, of course, by Whitmore money. Evelyn wasn't invited to the celebration, but she didn't need an invitation anymore. She had something stronger. On her 18th birthday, the Whitmore family attorney arrived at the estate with a sealed letter. Cassandra had written it years ago, before she died, before she was killed. The attorney addressed the household in the study. According to Cassandra Whitmore's will, he began, unfolding the document, 70% of Whitmore Steele's voting shares were transferred to Evelyn Whitmore upon her 18th birthday. Additionally, all trust accounts, properties in her name, and certain joint assets with her mother are now fully under her control. Veronica turned pale. David clenched his fists. Camilla stared in confusion. Evelyn stood still, unmoving, as the words settled. For legal purposes, the attorney added, Mr. Whitmore retains no authority over the Whitmore Steel Company, effective immediately. That night, Veronica lost her smile. David drank in silence. And Evelyn, for the first time in her life, locked her bedroom door and breathed freely. But she didn't sleep. She stayed awake, reading her mother's letters again. Letters that Zoe had kept hidden from David. In them, Cassandra had written about fear, her growing suspicion of David, the arguments, the way he had grown secretive. "I don't know why," Cassandra had written in one letter, "but I have the sinking feeling that I'm not safe." Evelyn clenched the pages. She had spent years asking what really happened to her mother. Now she had the power and the reason to find out. In the morning, she went to Zoe. "I want to know the truth," Evelyn said, her voice steady. "About my mother. About what really happened. I don't believe she took her life." Zoe looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Then we start digging." And so began the final reckoning. Because Evelyn was no longer a helpless girl. She was a woman, an heiress, a daughter on a mission. And for David, Veronica, and Camilla, the years of cruelty, manipulation, and murder were finally coming back to haunt them. The tension inside the mansion had shifted. It was no longer the quiet disdain, no longer veiled insults at dinner or stolen glances filled with contempt. After the lawyer revealed Cassandra's will and declared Evelyn as the sole heir of all her mother's wealth and 70% controlling shares in Whitmore Enterprises, a storm had been brewing. David sat silently in his study, fingers steepled under his chin, eyes glassy and far away. Veronica stood nearby, arms crossed tightly over her chest, seething. "I told you she would be a problem," Veronica hissed. "We should have gotten rid of her years ago when she was still a child." David didn't answer immediately. His once sharp mind, once brilliant at deception and manipulation, was unraveling under the weight of failure and growing desperation. She wasn't supposed to have anything. The will. I checked. It was sealed. There's no way Cassandra changed it after what we did. Well, she did, Veronica snapped. And now your precious little daughter, she spat the word like poison, owns everything. And legally she's untouchable, David muttered. But Veronica wasn't done. She moved to the window, staring out as Evelyn walked across the garden alone. She knows, Veronica said suddenly, her voice trembling. I see it in her eyes. She knows what we did. She's just waiting, gathering proof. She's her mother's daughter. David clenched his jaw. That was the fear that kept him awake. That Evelyn wasn't just a naive, broken girl. She was quiet, observant, and too smart for her age. She had stopped reacting. She no longer cried, no longer begged. She simply watched, listened, waited, and that terrified him. 18 now, Evelyn had grown into a young woman shaped by sorrow and betrayal. The only warmth in her life had come from Aunt Zoe, her mother's best friend, who had visited her when she could, sent her books, offered kind words, and told her stories of Cassandra, her real mother. Not the version David painted, not the one Veronica mocked. The puzzle in Evelyn's mind had never stopped forming. Her mother's suicide had always felt wrong. Cassandra had loved her, protected her, and Evelyn remembered, no matter how young, how sudden it all had been. One day her mother was laughing, telling her stories, and the next she was gone. For years, David refused to answer questions. He banned any mention of Cassandra in the house. Pictures were removed. Her room was locked. Evelyn had been pushed into a shell while Vanessa, the daughter of her mother's killer, was treated like royalty. But Evelyn was no longer silent. With access to the estate and documents now granted to her, she began quietly piecing together evidence. She started with the police report, flimsy and vague. She hired a private investigator using her mother's trust fund. She tracked down the former housekeeper, who had long disappeared after Cassandra's death. And when Evelyn offered her protection, the woman finally confessed. David and Veronica had been having an affair before the marriage. The night Cassandra died, Veronica was in the house. That was the crack in the dam. Camilla, who once strutted around in Evelyn's clothes and laughed while her mother mocked Evelyn's pathetic tears, had begun to feel the change too. The power had shifted. Evelyn was no longer a servant in her own home. She was the heir. And with that came control. Over the company, the household staff, the family accounts. Camilla stormed into her mother's room one night. She's winning. And you and Dad are just sitting here like cowards. Veronica slapped her. You shut your mouth. You think you know everything. David, pacing behind them, turned with fire in his eyes. She's on to us. If we don't act, everything will fall. What do you mean act? Camilla said, her voice shaking now. But the room had grown too quiet. David was already dialing a number. While Evelyn quietly gathered legal files and sought out her mother's former friends, Aunt Zoe had been doing her own digging. She had long suspected David. She had seen the bruises Cassandra covered with makeup, the flicker of fear in her eyes. But she had never thought he would go as far as murder. Until now, she confronted Evelyn at the estate. They're planning something, Zoe warned, gripping her arm. David's too calm. That woman's too quiet. And I've been followed twice this week. Evelyn's heart pounded, but she nodded. I'm ready. She handed Zoe a flash drive. I've gathered enough. Bank transactions, security logs, my mother's medical reports, even the voice message she left you that night, but it never went through. I recovered it from her old phone. Zoe gasped. You have proof. Evelyn's eyes were steel. Yes, and we take them down. Together. A week later, David and Veronica were arrested at dawn. The private investigator had handed over evidence to the district attorney. The housekeeper's sworn statement, the tampered autopsy report, the large sum of money transferred to a fake account the day Cassandra died. And most damning of all, an audio recording found on Cassandra's hidden voice memo app, never deleted. David, please, what are you doing? I saw her in our room. You lied. You planned this. Don't come closer. It ended in silence. The media erupted. Whitmore Enterprises stock dropped and rose again once Evelyn was confirmed as acting CEO. Public sympathy surged. Camilla was sent to live with relatives out of state, her name stained by her parents' crimes. In court, Evelyn sat in the front row, head held high, as her father and his mistress were sentenced to life in prison for conspiracy, murder, fraud, and abuse. They didn't look at her once, but she looked at them, and she did not flinch. Months later, Evelyn stood in her mother's old garden, the one Cassandra once planted herself. Zoe joined her, placing a single white rose on the bench beside them. You did it, Zoe whispered. You gave her justice. Evelyn nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. I just wish she was here to see it. She is, Zoe said. She always has been. In you. Evelyn smiled faintly. Her voice steady, her eyes on the horizon, she spoke. This house will become a shelter for girls who've been silenced. Girls like me. Like her. I'm turning this pain into purpose. Zoe reached for her hand. She would be proud. Evelyn closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of roses, sunlight warming her skin. And finally, peace returned to the estate Cassandra once called home.